All right, here we go. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another session of Lunch and Learn with Geo. Um, Today, we're going to talk about practical uses of AI in the legal world. We've got two really smart people joining us. Well, I'm not sure about Rick Orderman, but Jared White is here anyway. Rick is here to support him. Jared and his company, Matey AI, have developed some cutting edge technology to help law firms. I'm sure he'll explain that later. But we're going to try to touch on some new subjects that you may not know about and how to use AI. All right. We are recording. And as lawyers,
writers. So I don't know.
We are recording. So the usual disclaimer, be careful what you say, although flattery will get you everywhere. We have some housekeeping requests. If you have any questions, use the chat box. We will try to address questions as they come up, but if not, we're going to open it up for questions from the field after the presentation. We'll be back on July 9th. We're going to be doing this second Wednesday of every month, and I've got stuff booked through the end of the year. So we've got some very interesting topics. Hope you join me whenever possible. If you want CLE credit, you have to be a member of the NWSBA, and we'll give you instructions on how to get credit at the end. But the only way you're going to get credit is if you're a member of the NWSBA. Meet Jared White. Jared is co-founder and serves as CEO of Matey AI. They have some interesting technology in what they're doing with AI. Very simply, they are really organizing your internal documents and creating an AI using your materials. And so Code of Professional Responsibility says that you have to stay up to date. We're going to try to do that. You have to stay up to date on the benefits and risks associated with technology. And interestingly, that's more and more becoming AI. I just saw a statistic that said that 80% of Illinois lawyers are now using AI in some format, even though they don't even realize that they're using it. Ethical changes, you have to keep up to date on technology. And I'm going to turn it over to Jared at this point. So Jared, it's your screen to share.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Geo. And I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you guys can see it.
We can.
Excellent. So thank you, Geo, for the introduction, and thank you everyone else that is here. A brief introduction about myself, and I'm joined by Rick Orderman, who Geo mentioned. He's our Vice President of Product Research and has far more legal experience than I do, more than a decade and a half of experience handling all sorts of complex litigation matters, in particular focusing on the discovery space and the investigation space, with three-letter agencies that we can't talk about in his background as well. And I'm just a software guy. I've been a software guy for many, many years, almost 30 years now, and found the legal space whenever my team and I of co-founders, and joined by folks like Rick. Our team is about almost 20 people now, and we decided to build software around the legal industry, utilizing the next wave of artificial intelligence that had burst onto the scene several years ago. So towards the end of 2022 was whenever we had the brainchild for this company. And so I won't go into a lot of detail in this because it's a CLE. I'm not trying to pitch my company here, but we'll have a Q&A at the end. And of course, my contact information available for you. And we're just pleased to present to you some of our thoughts about AI and how it affects the legal industry and how we're excited about that. And then, as I mentioned at the end, I'll give a more of a description as to what we do and how we particularly address that. But just diving directly into it. And by the way, feel free to interrupt me and stop me and ask questions. I love to nerd out about this stuff. I can go kind of as deep as you'd like to go on how this stuff works at a conceptual level and a practical level, all the way down to the math of it. If anyone would like to discuss that, but just briefly, a few things about artificial intelligence, and I think a lot about artificial intelligence and how it is changing the human experience. And if you think back, like, to our grandparents or our great grandparents, my great grandmother moved my grandmother and her 11 brothers and sisters with her husband in a covered wagon. And at the same time, she saw she didn't see the first, the Wright brothers fly their airplane, but she saw the moon landing. And my grandmother saw the moon landing, but didn't see an iPhone. My grandmother has an iPhone, and we talk. She's like 90 something years old now, and it's wonderful. And she uses AI even if she doesn't really know about it. And a version of that is whenever she's voice texting into her phone and stuff. But that was really unheard of like 30 years ago, that you could do those types of transcriptions. And so conceptually, we've been thinking about how to build these artificial intelligences throughout our entire human experience, dating back into ancient times, where they would envision sort of like this oracle, that captured all of the knowledge and wisdom of ancient Greece and so forth. And then artificial intelligence itself became a phrase of art in the 1950s by John McCarthy, and they started to formalize some of these methods. And you may have heard of Alan Turing, and Alan Turing is sort of the Einstein of my field. And there's something called the Turing test, which is, can an artificial intelligence confuse me and make me think that it's another human being? And I think that if you've played with ChatGPT, as I'm sure many of you have, and other language models like from Anthropic and so forth, it's easy to be confused and surprised at how good it is at a minimum mimicking what another human being would do. And so I think that we've well passed what's called the Turing test. And what a lot of people don't know about Alan Turing, unless you saw this movie called The Imitation Game, is that he wanted to build an AI, and he literally invented the science of computer science because he had lost his childhood friend whenever he was about 10 years old. So he was at a boarding school, and this childhood friend goes home, happens to die, I think, of tuberculosis, never comes back, and he spent the remainder of his life trying to invent essentially a way of communicating with his childhood friend. And so here we are today, passing the Turing test. And it is now becoming what I think of as like the next massive component of our worldwide GDP. So even this year is estimated that over $320 billion would be spent purely on AI. That's people buying AI products and people investing in generating new AI in the marketplace. And so this is taking over. And I think that we've only begun to see what this will look like. So I like to think of it in phases of AI. There's like some that precede the ones that are on your screen today. Maybe one of the original forms of AI would have been predicting the weather, and it's sort of a joke that they're pretty terrible about doing that. But I think recently 20 or 25 years celebrated the anniversary of the Roomba or the iRobot, and so maybe you've all had one of those. I've had a couple of different ones. And I think of like this is like sort of the first real product that was an AI product in your house, that was accessible to the average person at a Best Buy. And so it runs around, and you don't really get the option of telling it what to do, but it runs around and sweeps your floor presumptively, and then you probably still want someone to sweep it. And then moving forward into the middle of your screen, you'll see this is the Siri logo, and so it's the voice transcription on your phone, or you're telling it to make an appointment or send an email. And I like to say that that's like 80% as good as I need it to be, because it still makes me feel like an idiot. But I also still have to tell it what to do, and that's an important distinction. And lastly, there's like this promise from the 1970s and 80s of Star Wars. Like I grew up like reading the Star Wars books and from various different authors, and like watching obviously the movies. And I always wanted my own R2D2 and C3PO, kind of following me around, doing things that I would normally have done otherwise, but I just don't have the time or the energy or the capacity to do. and how R2-D2 could sort of like plug in to the Death Star or the fly the spaceship, and it's like this is what I want. And so, by the way, that's what I'm building. So
Looking for my own Terminator.
yes, your own Terminator would be a lovely, lovely little bit of bodyguard to have, you know. Or if you've seen the Iron Man movies, the Jarvis, you know, it's like, hey, I built something while you were asleep, you know. And by the way, that's what I'm trying to build with Matey AI. So think about it in terms of evolution or layers, you know, as we progress, I think it's going to be more and more shocking what these systems are able to do for us and how it can do so proactively. But importantly, I think that we're going to see a world where we're no longer telling the AI what to do. And this is a bit of a scary thought for me. And I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they're going to grow up in a world, in my view, where the AI is starting to tell us what to do or to give us recommendations about what to do. And already we've seen, for example, in the medical profession, where diagnoses by doctors not using AI is about 75% accurate, and diagnoses with doctors that are using AI is about 10% better. So it's 85%. And so there's a point at which you start to wonder, is it unethical to not use AI in a given profession? And I don't know where that is for the legal profession, but I would imagine it's coming soon. Um, Onto the scene came in 2018, and very few people heard about it. I didn't hear about this until 2020, and this is sort of like a profession of mine. I spent a large number of years in machine learning on the quantitative space, trading the Chicago futures markets as well as the New York stock markets, and had never really heard about Chat GPT until about 2020, 2021. But as early as 2018, they were building these GPT models. And for those that don't know, GPT stands for Generalized Pre-trained Transformer. And it basically means we've encoded a bunch of knowledge into this system. And to give you kind of a point of reference of how the progression of these models has gone, there were originally about 115, 120 million parameters in the model. And so I had Rick, who helped me with this slide deck today, show us like conceptually what that means. If you look at that equation on the screen, I promise this is the only equation you're going to have to see today. There's 3 variables in that equation that you see on the screen. And whenever we're using a GPT, the original version of it had 117 million of those. Today, if you go out and use ChatGPT, you're using something that has 1.7 trillion such variables. And it's really difficult to get our head around this. So you can think about it in terms of like if 1 second was one parameter, well, a million seconds is a couple weeks, right? And a billion seconds is about 30 years, and a trillion seconds is 30,000 years. There's 5 times, 6 times the length of the human written history. But there's 1.7 trillion parameters in these models, and it's expected that they're going to continue growing. And it's to the point where you'll see a huge percentage of the overall electricity that's produced by human beings at large being consumed by AI, and all of it's just basically doing math like you see on the screen right there. But and this is another little bit of trivia that I want to talk about, then we'll talk about how this applies to the legal profession. But everyone has heard of ChatGPT, but there's really 4 companies that if those companies didn't exist, ChatGPT would not exist, and or any of the other, for that matter, machine learning technologies like Claude, or even, for example, Google Maps, which has elements of machine learning in it as well. So NVIDIA, you know, everyone's familiar with them. Potentially, if you've ever built a computer, most people don't do that anymore. But in the 90s, in early 2000s, I was building my own computers, and you'd buy an NVIDIA graphics card. And at some point, people figured out that they could use the graphics card to do a bunch of this math. And as a result of that, it would be a much faster experience than using just your regular CPU from Intel. But NVIDIA's success would not exist without a company called Taiwan Semiconductor, and Taiwan Semiconductor is sort of unseated AMD and Intel and a few others as the preeminent supplier of microchips. So if you've designed microchips, you're going to Taiwan Semiconductor and having them generate those chips for you so that you can put them into your iPhone and so forth. And that's what's powering most of our computers today. But Taiwan Semiconductor wouldn't exist without a company out of the Netherlands called Applied Semi. And ASML is their stock symbol, and they generate the machines that Taiwan Semiconductor uses. and they're the only ones that can do it. Literally, it's the only company in the world that can do it. And even if it's Samsung instead of Taiwan Semiconductor, they're using an ASML system to do that. And these systems it takes like 4 or 5 777s to ship these across the world for a single machine. It takes months to put them together. But even them, they wouldn't have the success that they do without an ancient company out of Germany called Zeiss, which builds the mirrors and the optical lenses that allow them to literally, they have to time it to where they're shooting laser beams at a little droplet of tin, and that droplet of tin will vaporize, generate a wavelength of light that is 13 nanometers, and they can focus it, and it'll actually print that image onto the chip. So it's very fascinating what goes into this AI, and thinking about how difficult. By the way, imagine how amazing our brains are. That our brains are still more advanced than ChatGPT, but all of us, all of the human intellect of the world going into this has still just barely scratched the surface of it. So fascinating. And I love nerding out about this stuff. So, okay. So how does this apply to legal technology? So we have seen I'm sure that all of you probably could find 30 emails in your inbox today where there is some legal AI vendor that has been wanting you to use their product. And it is everywhere. We see a new version of this every day. And I think one of the biggest reasons that we see this is because for the longest time, we have taught computers how to calculate and do math. And now we have taught computers how to read. So only in the past 5 years have we really taught computers how to read and understand and how to write. And so this naturally now starts to benefit the legal profession, whereas previously machine learning might have been necessary for you, like whenever you were doing the Ford Explorer cases and you want to detect some statistical analysis around it, right? That's using computers to do math to generate artificial intelligence in the sense. But now we can literally have it write documents for us and read documents for us. And so we see legal research. Whenever you're looking for case law, you're trying to find what is the strike zone for a motion in a particular courtroom, et cetera. All sorts of tools, that are being layered on top of things like Westlaw, LexisNexis, Bloomberg Law, et cetera, that are helping you find the relevant case law. And those are the kinds of things that we're integrating into our product as well. Contract review is another one. So how do I, whenever someone sends me a 700-page document, how do I understand what's in it? And I've even used ChatGPT to tell me what's in my cell phone plan, what's my cancellation policy, et cetera, just to see if it understood it, and it does a great job of it. But this is being used on virtually, I think about 50% of all contracts today have an AI component where the attorney reviewing that is using AI to review it, and the attorney who's presenting that is using AI to write it. And so with products like Litera, for example, which I'm sure some of you have used, you can give it a prompt and say, I want, a liquidated damages clause that looks like this and behaves like that. And it'll help you write it. And then, of course, you then own that. So as the attorney of record, and so now it's upon you to make it look like what you want, but it gives you that first step. Document generation, as I just mentioned, contracts, but filing motions and briefs, writing motions and briefs. These are the sorts of things that we think of as first-class members of our software platform. And we see a world where most documents in the near future are going to be written, at least in part, or the first drafts thereof, by AI. Doing due diligence is an important aspect. And whenever someone's doing a merger and there's a risk, there's always a time crunch, et cetera. AI is a perfect tool to go read. Because you can force it to read everything and it doesn't get tired. And then lastly, knowledge discovery, which is an area that my company spends a huge amount of time on, just understanding what's in the data in a litigation. We have a number of different modules like criminal defense, immigration compliance at the corporate level, employment investigations, whenever an HR department feels like there's a problem with an employee, but there's 500,000 emails to read, et cetera. Rather than going to outside counsel, they can handle this matter directly in-house initially to get a sense of what's happening, because AI can now read and understand and glean knowledge out of a large amount of unstructured data. So
I want to add something for those of you who don't know. We'll go through this stuff. Legal research, Lexis, Westlaw, and you could use ChatGPT to ask questions. But what you could also then do is take whatever result you get and throw it into Lexis or Westlaw, and it'll analyze and tell you if it's accurate or not. Contract review. First thing, you could take any contract, any agreement, I don't care how long it is, you could throw it into ChatGPT and it will summarize the contract for you so that you could get a quick overview of what the contract, and then you could ask it to zone in on a particular clause. Document generation, this is, we've been doing that for years, but it gets easier with programs like ChatGPT. And contract review, I want to go back to contract review. There's a software called Spellbook. Spellbook will take any contract, analyze it, and give you terms, or it will draft whatever contract you want and give you a draft of a contract for you to work on. These are sophisticated law clerks, paralegals that you have on your desk now. If our due diligence, do something as silly as this. Ask it what documents you should ask for due diligence in a particular transaction. It'll give you a list of documents that you should ask for. I actually had it, tried it, and gave it some financial information of a company, deleting the personal data, but I asked it to value a business, and it gave me a pretty good valuation of a business. This stuff is amazing, and it's only limited by your own creativity in using it.
Yeah, that's an exceptional point there, Gio, because I think about like a race car or a fighter jet, right? Which has this extraordinary power, but it has to be driven or flown by someone who's an expert. Otherwise, it's a waste. And so I don't think of this as ever going to replace lawyers. Like, we're not trying to replace lawyers. We're trying to just make your guys' lives more efficient and, give you more peace of mind. Maybe you don't have to go through 80 hours a week anymore, to get the same amount of work product that you would normally do. And so think about what that does to your quality of life. Think about what it does to your, maybe it makes more sense at some point to not bill by the hour, you bill by the outcome, or you bill by a flat fee, all sorts of things that can be available to you. And I think of it think of it in the way that, from a software engineer's perspective, I'm a software engineer by trade, and we use it to help us write software. But I don't think that there's going to be fewer software engineers in the same way I don't think there's going to be fewer lawyers. I just think that the threshold and attainability of matters that would be relevant to like producing a brand new software application, or the matters that would be relevant to contract a lawyer, will just expand, because there's all sorts of things that aren't being handled at all by attorneys, or they're not getting the proper attention that they need from legal advice that will now be available because the attorneys aren't already overworked. And so it's really fascinating how powerful these tools are, but they still require you, as the person who, you understand, whenever it gives you the list of documents to request and due diligence, you kind of understand what that means. I wouldn't, I would just sort of be flying blind here. And maybe I can read those documents. Maybe I can ask ChatGPT again how to explain that document to me and so forth. But that's not what I think is going to happen. It's not replacing the lawyers. The lawyers are still going to have to give advice. And
well, I kind of disagree with you, Jared.
Well,
I think that as AI gets more and more advanced, especially in the next 5 to 10 years, our future is in jeopardy. But that's a whole other story.
I know. Yes, they're not very fun conversations to have sometimes, but they're I would say enjoyable conversations, just as a thought experiment. So we'll see. And as they say today, the good news is today, as they say, like, you're not going to be replaced by AI, but you'll be replaced by someone who uses AI. So I think it's important to gain these skills and start to play with it if you haven't already, so that you're abreast of like what its capabilities even are. And it may fascinate you and give you some of your life back. So. Okay, so moving into just like, what are some software platforms? We've talked a little bit about those. There's a few I think of as legacy players, and we operate largely in the discovery space, the investigations, understanding large unstructured data sets, and so forth. So you've all, I'm sure, used Relativity, Reveal. I'm sure you've heard of CF Disco. If you haven't used it, Everlaw is another one. And I think of Everlaw still categorized as a legacy player, even though they're quite a bit newer on the field, and they claim to be sort of AI native. We have some we understand their product pretty well. A lot of these products are layering AI on top of an existing traditional platform like Relativity. And so maybe you're paying $6 or $8 or $10 per gig, and then it's another $3 per gig to use their Relativity Air product, which is sort of like a natural language query system and so forth. And so there's lots of this layering that's happening on top of those traditional SQL Server kind of platforms. And we think of those as a little bit, they're a little unsatisfying. Obviously, we're biased, but I don't necessarily think that those products are kind of like going to replace a whole lot of the workflows that happen. But there are some next generation platforms, and we have modestly kept ourselves off of this for the purposes of CLE, but we can talk about that another time if anyone's interested. Harvey, I'm sure you've heard of Harvey. If you haven't, they've raised they've raised a $5 billion valuation. I think they've raised a ton of, about $1 billion, doing contract analysis, legal research, helping you write drafts of things, automating certain workflows, largely generating work product for attorneys. And I say that like Harvey is helping attorneys do the kinds of things that attorneys love to do. Co-counsel is another one where there's agentic workflows around, legal research and helping you write motions and so forth. And that's by Thomson Reuters. Latera, again, some document management, some helping you with, there's some contract elements in it, I believe, et cetera. And these are some of the newer products that have happened. But one I wanted to bring up is Do Not Pay, because Do Not Pay got in some trouble for essentially offering what the government decided was legal advice, with respect to traffic tickets and things like that. And so they had, if you feel like you should dispute your traffic cam ticket that you received, or maybe your parking ticket or so forth, you could go there and it would sort of automate your objection to it with the courts. And essentially they got a slap on the wrist because of what they considered operating as a legal service without a legal license. So an interesting set of platforms that are coming onto the space right now. And we think of this as being just the start. And there will be a consolidation phase that happens in the next 3 to 4 years. And so maybe you won't get 30 emails a week about this, but you'll still get 3 or 4. But regardless of what your area of law is, it is not my belief that there's going to be one centralized AI that is the legal AI. There's going to be hundreds. And in fact, I would argue, because and I'm biased, if it gives you a clue about what Matey is, but we argue that there is going to be an individualized AI that becomes a version of you at the end of your career. So it's followed everything that's ever happened. It knows every email you've ever written, every document you've ever written, and then it can essentially behave as if it is you in the same way that R2D2 and C3PO were individualized characters that it could mimic and behave like Luke Skywalker. So
Will it overdrink with me on a Friday night?
absolutely, yes, it would encourage you to do so. In fact, so but here's the thing: with great power comes great responsibility, and
We're mixing metaphors, right? Spider-Man, Star Wars.
Yeah. All sorts of AI that you can think of. And I think it's a great point that you bring up, Michael, because we struggle to really, I struggle to conceptualize like what all of this will look like. And so I have to turn to science fiction to really understand it and comprehend it. But it's also motivating in a sense because it gives us a sort of a rabbit to chase, if you will. And you read the books from whenever you were a kid, and you're promised like flying cars and robots to do all this kind of stuff. And so then, but now we actually have the ability to build that. So it's really kind of fun. But there's great responsibility. So I think Gio mentioned the Terminator, right? And so we don't want that. How do we prevent that? So how do we make this thing safe for us? But also how do we like stay within the ethical constraints of what, as a legal profession, we have to do? So there are some guidelines, some ethical guidelines. I think it's ABA 512. It talks a lot about this. Joe, you actually mentioned the rule one, is it 1.1, the competency guidelines is like you have to kind of stay abreast of this. So it's important for us to know what these things do and a sense of how they operate so that we know what their pitfalls are so that we can avoid those. But if you know, obviously the traditional rules apply. We can't have a tool like, you know, all these new products that are coming out, these AI products, and then forget about the data security that we have been implementing throughout these processes from the beginning all the way back to whenever they were papers in the filing cabinet to, you know, more recently, a relativity workflow or a reveal workflow, now a Matey workflow, if you will, or an Everlaw workflow. We still have to maintain that data security. And so whatever software vendor you choose for whatever type of AI product, you know, SOC 2 compliance, ISO 27001 compliance is crucial.
You know, Jared, I think that something the trust and the hallucination issue, I think is something that I just want to pound for a minute. And that
Yes.
is a lot of people use the concept or the threat of hallucination as an excuse not to use AI. And that is back asswards. It's just not, it doesn't, that's not, that should not freeze you or prevent you from using it. There's a lot of good that can be done. Yeah, there's some risks, but you have to be alert of the risks and you have to verify anything else. It's like a law clerk giving you a draft of a brief. Do you trust it to be accurate, or are you going to double check it? And there are ways to double check it. Both Lexis, Westlaw, and I think Fastcase do it too now. They have an internal check to see if what you've got is accurate. To this point, every federal judge, every law clerk in federal court has Westlaw on their computer. They get it for free. And one of the programs or one of the features of Westlaw is it will verify citations. It will actually tell you if the cases that are being cited are right on point, or if there are better cases, or if it's off point. And every federal court, when they get a brief, they put those briefs through that Westlaw analysis. And if you're not doing that before you file your briefs, then I think that you are doing yourself a real disservice.
Yes, that's a very good point. And I was actually speaking with an attorney 2 days ago about the Westlaw feature and how, well, to begin with, it's fascinating to me that, you know, for a couple of 100 years, they've been collecting case law, and it has become sort of this, you know, it's almost like third-party system that captures case law in America through a couple of these different products, Lexis and Bloomberg Law, which is like kind of a distant third player, and a few others that are sort of trying now. So that part is fascinating to me. And I was talking about this, and he's like, yeah, there used to be a point where the head notes, for example, in Westlaw were really valuable because that was how you could more easily find things. And then it would give you sort of like, you know, the past 10 years, this is the number of times this case has been referenced and so forth. And so they've got this index built. And it's fascinating to me the number of cases that you've seen come out where they're citing cases that are completely hallucinated. And we could even go into some details about why it hallucinates, and how to avoid those things. There's all sorts of ways to structure your artificial intelligence as a software vendor and the software platform to prevent this hallucination. And so I would expect, and we're not in the business of writing briefs just yet, but whenever we are, we will be in a first-class feature of our product, for example, and this is our thesis around what all of these products should do, is that we should not be releasing something that we haven't also used AI to check. Because Westlaw is going to use AI to check it. So why wouldn't we do it before we even turn it over to you, and give you some sort of like a certification seal to say, these are those cases, and this is why we think they apply. And this is maybe even a confidence score about how good of an application this is to this particular set of this particular matter. And we think of those things as being an opportunity for our work product as a profession to improve, and certainly not an area where it's embarrassing whenever we're making things up off the fly. And so in the one other element here we have is called benchmarks. And the simplest way of thinking about this is just there should be a scoring mechanism where we can say, how good is this AI? So it's easy for us to analyze how good the weather predictor is. Whenever you listen to the weather and there's an AI system that is predicted that you're going to get, 0.2 inches of rain tomorrow in this particular area or region, and you can kind of have a sense of how accurate that is. They've gotten much better. We need the same exact thing for legal AI. We need the ability to measure ourselves against like what the humans would have done, like what is the best of breed in this particular scenario versus what our software can do. And in my view, the software needs to be better than what the humans could have done because the software shouldn't be getting tired. Rick can speak a lot about this because he spent a good bit of time in the e-discovery space. And so there's competitions, for example, tar competitions and cow competitions, and people go and they, present teams of, searching through the Jeb Bush emails, for example. How does that compare to what AI can do today? And, we have some case studies that we've done about that. And it's really cool to see that the AI can be better and obviously much faster because you can have it read 450,000 emails in a few minutes these days. So it's really kind of cool. It's very fun to watch. So, and then largely speaking, how do we leverage? What does it do? What is this software platform doing to leverage AI? And in our view, our next generation of software platforms, they will almost all be AI native. So I'd be very surprised to see any sort of legal software coming out in the next 5 years that doesn't tell you that it's AI native, and it should be
What does
built.
what does AI native mean?
It means it's more than just like storing it into a database and using keywords to search. It means that it's using, whenever we use AI to read all of those emails, for example, to find any given email about the subject of space travel or the space industry, we're not looking for the keyword of space. We're giving some text to a language model and saying, does this text apply to this particular subject that we're looking for? And then a language model is reading it and analyzing it and saying, yes, I have like a 12th grade education, or maybe like I'm a freshman in college, and I would rationally say that this email relates to the subject of space. So to us, that's the AI native version of a search, as opposed to just a keyword database match, traditional database index type of search.
I remember a case where we had engineers were suing for negligence, and there was a email between engineers that said this product is being designed by monkeys and being managed by clowns. Right? I swear, I won't tell you who the defendant was, but you know, how in the world? The only way we found it 6 years ago was doing a document by document review of those things, and now it becomes a lot easier to find stuff like that.
I'll say another anecdote. I think I know what company you're talking about. Another anecdote is there was a manufacturing company, and I think they used like titanium or some very expensive materials, and the raw materials kept going missing, and they couldn't figure out why there's like multiple pounds of this going missing every day, whenever they would do inventory, and so they did. There's a few hundred people that worked at the plant, and they all had email and text messages and so forth, and so they were able to gather the text messages, I think it was, and or the emails from this one group, a subset of them, and they also went through and read case by case or email by email to see like what are these people communicating about, and they figured out that the in that particular instance there was like five folks that were saying to one another every day, did you eat your hot dog today? Did you, John had two hot dogs and, someone else over here had one hot dog. And what that was meant is, that was using it obviously as an inside joke or a euphemism for taking the rod of platinum or titanium in their lunchbox out to their truck and then dropping it off in the truck. And they were doing this so that they wouldn't be too much missing on any given day. But hot dog is obviously not related to did you steal something from work today? And so it took people realizing that, like, okay, there's lots of hot dogs that I eat, but I don't eat one every day. And every person on my team doesn't eat a hot dog every day. So this looks like this is an aberration of communication. But we actually, an AI native version of the software you can ask it questions like, are there any inside jokes that are being told from this set of 500,000 text messages? And that's the sort of thing that it will surface for you. So a really fascinating applicability of AI today. And it's just because it doesn't get bored. It can read 500,000 text messages and answer any number of questions that you would have about it. Whereas it would be cost prohibitive, obviously, to have humans do that for very many instances. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but ABA Formal Opinion 512 is what governs the ethics and responsibilities around AI. So encourage you, we have a white paper that we're writing about this. And like I said earlier, like all of the traditional rules still matter. And we think a lot about, as AI practitioners, how do we prevent data from being shared across cases? Still very important. So it's extremely important whenever you're searching your AI or you're having your AI generate work product for you, it's not polluting your current case with something from a previous case that you've been working on. All sorts of ways of doing that within the software platform. It's important that they can promise that. And the biggest question that we always get is, are you using my data to train your models? And we are happy that we will always be able to say no. Now, that comes with a caveat in some instances because we want to train a model that behaves like you, for example, so that you yourself can be embodied essentially as an AI. An AI attorney can be your sort of, in your back pocket or your little best friend. But that should not train data specific to a case that you've had in the past, and a case that you're going to try in the future. So it should be completely anonymized and abstracted. So these are the general elements of the case, and this was the general thing that I did and the general outcome of it. And then that generality can be used in the same way that you remember those cases and you became a better lawyer because of those. Those kinds of things we can train on, but we cannot train using John Doe's case from that gave you a retainer last week. Anyone doing that is doing everyone a disservice. And then we talk a lot about open models versus closed models. And so there are open source models that will show us what essentially all of those trillion parameters that we've resolved, like what those values are. And so you can download what those are, and that's wonderful. Very, very few models will show you actually how they trained that data and how they learned what their data set was for learning those parameters. And so Facebook, I think, releases an open source model called Llama, and that's an open source model. The weights are published, but the training set is not. We've seen other instances. Some of the models that came out of China earlier this year, they did release their training sets. And so we started to see in some instances people release this, but the closed models where people are using it to generate these brand new, what we call the foundational models, those models and those training sets are highly proprietary. And so we're essentially in a state of the industry where we have to trust them. And I think it's important to pick the right one so that you feel comfortable trusting them. So in our particular case, we use Anthropic. We use, in some instances, Gemini from Google. And we use the OpenAI models, but they're hosted at the Microsoft data centers. So we can be very confident that they're not training on our data. They respect privacy considerations, and any of the data that we send it is not going to go anywhere else. It's still considered our data, and it's not even going to show up in some system log someplace. But sadly, I want fully open models that have even the training sets are provided to us for our own inspection. But those training sets are sometimes like 15 trillion words long. And so they're very proprietary and they have an enormous cost associated with them. So there's probably going to be a substantial number of years before we see a fully open model system. Lastly, and George, I don't know how long we're going to go, but I can conclude here. I'll give you 30-second overview of my software platform, and then anyone else that ever wants to talk about this, I'm not going to try to sell you something if you don't want it. But I love to talk to you about it because I love to learn. Since I don't have a legal background, many members of our team do, but I don't. But I'm fascinated by what you guys do. My childhood best friends are attorneys, and I say a third of my adult life conversations have been with lawyers, and we typically are talking about legal matters like politics or how legislation would be structured is something that I really enjoy. And by the way, I've always said I'd much prefer to hire a lawyer to become a software engineer than a mathematician. I don't know if that makes you feel any better, but I think that lawyers are much closer to software engineers than mathematicians are. And so I feel a very kindred spirit with you guys in the way that you think. With that said, I just enjoy talking to lawyers. Reach out anytime. And you're muted.
Jared, I don't think, can I summarize in my own words what you guys do?
Yes, please do.
I think what Matey does is really cool. Every one of us lawyers have been practicing for a while, let's say in a specific area, and I'll use divorce as an example. So you've been a divorce lawyer for 25 years. You have 25 years of pleadings, briefs, research, expert opinions, whatever it is, and it's all sitting on your computer now. What Matey does, it takes all of your cases, all of your materials, all of everything you have, and it creates an AI on your platform. It uses your information as basically the LLM, the large language model, to create so that you could create something internally. And you could do that in any practice area because every one of us is a walking, well, not walking, but our computers are its own LLM. I hope I said that right, Jared.
Yeah, I think it's a really great way of conceptualizing it. And so we started in the discovery space because we needed to be able to read any of those documents. And then moving into the space where we can capture all of the work product that you've ever built and the way that you've practiced law over these years to help you remember that, to help automate it for you. So if you're a divorce lawyer, you can use our platform to sort of automate the traditional things, the first 15 things you would do on that type of maybe that's a highly contentious custody case, or maybe it's just like a very amicable no contest type scenario where there just needs to be a few documents written and these people will move on their way. So whatever those types of things are, they can be individually automated, and eventually the system learns from how you do that so that whenever a new case comes in, it figured out that this is highly contentious because they said so in their email to me,
Yeah.
trouble,
All
etc.
right. Well, all right.
Yeah.
Let's open it up to some questions. There are two guys here that I really think a lot of. Jonathan Nestler is here, and so is Matthew Kurbis. I think they are two of the smartest lawyers using AI that I know. John, do you have anything you want to add right now?
I don't have anything to add. I'm kind of interested in. I'll probably reach out to the speaker about some kind of technical questions about what his software does. I'm interested in it, to say the least.
Okay.
But nothing really to add. No.
All right. Matthew Kurbis, the subscription lawyer. Are you still with us? Nope, maybe you left. All right. Does anybody have any questions you want to ask?
So here's a quick question, Mike Pezanka. So you're talking about all the great things this thing does, but what about the whittling away of our Fourth Amendment right of expectation of no unreasonable search or seizure? And when you have no privacy, or you've mentioned work product, when all this stuff starts getting taken from us, from all of our hard work and shared with non-lawyers, that effectively cut out law school, right? That's great that this helps, but at the same time, how do you get around? Now you no longer have attorney-client privilege when all of your work product is sitting out there. Help us
Well,
understand that.
Michael, all right. First of all, that's a good point, but let's just use Chat GPT as an example. if you're using the free version, there's no privacy whatsoever. There's no security. But if you move up into higher levels, the subscription levels, in the top right-hand corner, there's a little button has settings on it. And you click on that button and you're set, and it says that whatever you put into it is not added to the large language model, the model that they code. So you could keep your data from going out into the LLM, number one. Number two, you don't put anything out. You could redact personal information on what you put out there, redact the name, the social security number, and anything else you think might be identified before you put it into the LLM. That's what you would do in any case. It's just you have to be careful about what you put into or throw out there into the netherworld. But there are ways to do it. And you just have to be aware of what you're putting out there. Jared?
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that. So the attorney-client privilege and your proprietary work product that you've generated over the years should be whatever software platform you use should honor that. And it should never, like Matey, for example, and I would dare say these other software platforms should never, and Matey will never sell any of that to another vendor who's making a model that then it becomes a matter of accessible to some other form of the public. It should only ever be accessible to you or your legal practice. Those to me are sort of the iron laws about what is required, just from, like I said earlier, like all of the ethical and security requirements that have existed for this profession for hundreds of years still apply, even more so. And we also now have the tools to ensure that those things are enforced. And so I think that, to answer your question, Michael, we should not have an unreasonable search and seizure problem, because any of the information that your client has shared with you should never make it outside of your four walls. And then in terms of your work product, no one else should be able to avail themselves of that, but it should help you. It makes you a better lawyer to have that accessible with an AI native approach. But it shouldn't help someone else who's just like not a lawyer at all using ChatGPT.
Any other questions?
I have a question about programs that use AI to replace Time Matters or Leap or other programs that lawyers use daily.
In other words, Robert, you want to know what AI software or programs are out there to replace the stuff that you use?
Yes, if that's available yet.
Oh yeah, they are, but I don't. In terms of, well, first of all, if you're just using Time Matters, you're not using anything more. You're behind times. So you need to get into a larger case management software that does everything at the same time. I will tell you that, like, let's say Clio. Clio now incorporates an AI feature as part of it. So it has an AI feature into it, and you can ask it to do things like monitor your schedule or things like that. But ChatGPT will do that too. You have to put the data in, it'll monitor it. But there's other case management softwares that go a lot deeper than that. Like, for example, FileVine. A lot of personal injury firms use FileVine. FileVine actually has internally a feature that will review medical records for you, summarize them.
Wow.
Then it will also help you prepare for your depositions. It'll take all the data about the case, whether it's depositions, interrogatories, whatever, and it'll organize and set up a deposition for you and tell you what questions to ask. This stuff is only AI is only limited by your own imagination and how you want to use it. One more example. I had a court of claims case involving the valuation of real estate. And I had 50 pages of notes about what I wanted to ask the other side's expert. So what I did was I put it all into ChatGPT, and I asked it to organize a deposition of that expert for me, and it gave me an outline of the deposition. And then I asked it to give me some more questions I hadn't thought of, and it gave me more questions that I hadn't thought of. So this is only limited by your own creativity.
Well, thanks,
And
George.
Robert, if you want to talk about it offline, give me a shout.
All
Anybody?
right, thank you. Thanks for all
Anybody
your
else have
work.
any questions? Okay, well, stop your sharing for me, Jared. And I want to go back to my share. All right, here's the next some closing thoughts. Next time, July 9th, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. Every lawyer should be aware of it. And if you want CLE credit, send an email to the NWSBA at attendance@nwsba.org. In the subject line, put thank you, and you will get credit for today's participation. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording.